welcome. Tonight, we're not just telling a royal story. We're stepping into a palace of silence, of diamonds, and depression, tiaras, and tears. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a love story. This is the life of Princess Diana, the girl who married a crown and ended up trapped behind it. She was beautiful, fragile, and smiling. But behind the smile was pain so loud it shook the throne. The world called her the people's princess, but the palace? They called her something else. Emotional, difficult, dangerous. This story has everything they didn't want you to see. Scandals whispered behind closed doors, affairs that broke the glass walls of Buckingham Palace. The Queen stayed silent. The tabloids screamed. And in the middle of it all, one woman, alone, in a storm she never asked for. Her childhood, her marriage, her breakdowns, her bulimia, her revenge, her quiet rebellion, and the final chase through a Paris tunnel, the one that ended too soon. This isn't just history. It's heartbreak, betrayal, and legacy. So if you can't sleep tonight, stay with me, turn down the lights, breathe in. Let's begin the long, quiet story of the girl who loved too much and paid the price for it. She was born on July 1st, 1961. Diana Frances Spencer. The world would one day know her name, adore her face, and cry for her loss. But in the beginning, there was no spotlight, no crown, only silence. She was the third daughter of the Spencer family, an old aristocratic bloodline that lived near the royal Sandringham estate. Her family had noble titles, grand homes, and expectations that didn't leave room for softness. Her father had hoped for a boy. When Diana was born, he didn't celebrate. He quietly moved on. And that feeling of not being enough would echo through the rest of her life. When Diana was just 6 years old, her parents' marriage shattered, her mother left. One day she was there, and the next she was gone, leaving behind Diana and her siblings in the care of a father who didn't know how to comfort children. The house grew quieter. Diana remembered the silence more than anything. That and the memory of her mother crying behind closed doors. She once said, "I remember seeing my mother cry all the time, and I always wondered who's comforting her." She was sent to boarding school, far from home, far from comfort. She wasn't a brilliant student. She didn't stand out in academics. She wanted to dance, to become a ballerina. But her body grew tall, awkward, and not quite right for the stage. The dream faded. She cried most nights. She wasn't bullied. She wasn't loved either. She was just there, floating in the background, sensitive, watching everything. She was 16 the first time she met Prince Charles. He was 29. He was dating her sister Sarah. It wasn't love, just a royal visit, a laugh, a kind word. And then years later, Diana reappeared in Charles's orbit. She was 19, innocent, blonde, from a good family, and most importantly, untouched by scandal. She was, by royal standards, perfect. And Charles was under pressure. The crown needed him married. Quickly, Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman he actually loved, was married to someone else, and more importantly, unacceptable. So the eyes of the monarchy turned to Diana. Diana believed it was love or something close. Tea gave her attention. Flowers. Small compliments. They met only 13 times before he proposed. When they announced the engagement, the world celebrated. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. One asked if they were in love. Diana laughed and said, "Of course." Charles looked at her, then looked away. "Whatever in love means," he said. That sentence would haunt her. She moved into Buckingham Palace. Cold walls, historic halls, no warmth, no welcome. Everything she did was observed, corrected, and judged. She had to learn how to wave, how to walk, how to smile, how to speak to the Queen, how to not speak at all. She became sick. It started slowly, Stress turned to anxiety. Anxiety turned to control. Control turned to bulimia. She would eat to comfort herself, then purge in secret. Charles was distant, cold, distracted. He made jokes about her weight, comments about her appearance. She once overheard him say to a friend, "She's a bit chubby, isn't she?" The man she loved didn't even see her. Not really. She found it days before the wedding, tucked away gold, elegant, a gift, but not for her. It was engraved with the initials F and G, Fred and Gladys, pet names. Charles and Camilla. He was still in love with her, always had been. Diana confronted him. He dismissed it, told her it was a farewell present. Nothing more. But Diana wasn't stupid. She knew Camilla was everywhere, on the phone. In his thoughts, in the background of every room. She cried the night before her wedding. She thought about calling it off. But how do you cancel the most watched wedding in history? So she smiled again. On July 29, 1981, she walked down the aisle in a silk dress with a 25-foot train, watched by 750 million people. The dress was wrinkled from the carriage. Her vows were nervous. She said his names in the wrong order. He forgot hers entirely, but no one noticed, because it looked like a dream. And she was now a princess, but not a loved wife. Not even a protected woman. She was a figure. A symbol. A photo. The world adored her. The palace tolerated her. And behind that glittering crown was a girl who just wanted to be held. To be understood. To be enough. The wedding was over. The dress was folded and preserved. The world had witnessed what they believed was a fairy tale. But for Diana, the story was just beginning, and it didn't feel like magic. It felt like falling. Their honeymoon took them through the Mediterranean, across royal yachts, glittering dinners, and camera flashes. Two outsiders, it looked blissful. But behind the closed doors of cabins and hotel rooms, Diana was slipping. Charles brought with him not just his suits and cufflinks, but stacks of books about philosophy, whole volumes. While Diana tried to connect, tried to smile and play the part, he withdrew. He read. He was distant. Even made private phone calls Diana knew who he was calling. Camilla's name echoed in her mind, louder each time Charles went quiet. At night, Diana would lie in bed and cry. Unsure of why the person she married seemed emotionally allergic to her presence. When she tried to open up, he would say she was too sensitive, that she took things too personally, that she was young and would learn. She was 20. She had just married a man who didn't love her. And now, she was sailing through Greece like a ghost on a boat full of strangers. The loneliness became unbearable. Her bulimia grew worse. She began vomiting after meals, sometimes several times a day. She didn't want to die, but she didn't quite want to live like this either. When they returned from the honeymoon, she was already exhausted. The palace wasn't a place where exhaustion was allowed. Her schedule was filled with appearances, visits, dinners, rehearsals for how to wave and how to walk. There was no privacy. Staff came and went. Royal advisors monitored every step. Her clothing was discussed, measured, criticized. Her weight was checked. Her hands were watched when she ate. She smiled through it all. Photographers adored her. She was young, beautiful, and lit up a room with a kind of warmth the royals didn't understand. They had been raised behind velvet walls, far from emotion. Diana cried in front of people. She hugged sick children. She reached for people instead of nodding at them, and the people loved her for it. The palace didn't. They found her too much, too emotional, too unpredictable. Her kindness made the rest of them seem cold. She was told to tone it down. But Diana had already learned that silence was deadly. The less she was allowed to say, the more she felt like she was disappearing. So she found other ways to feel seen. When Charles began pulling further away, sometimes for days, sometimes in silence, Diana tried to fill the void. She started obsessing over his movements. She watched him closely. One day she followed him. What she found confirmed everything she already knew. Camilla, still there, always there. Charles would later say that his relationship with Camilla didn't resume until the marriage had irretrievably broken down. But Diana would say it never ended. Even when they were newly married, Charles would speak fondly of Camilla, would compare their conversations, would disappear for meetings and come back smelling like another woman's perfume. Diana once told a close aide, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." But even in her heartbreak, she refused to be silent. She began reaching out to journalists, subtly at first, leaking small things, honest things. She wanted the world to see what the palace tried so hard to hide. And while Charles tried to make her look unstable behind the scenes, she made herself untouchable in the public eye. She showed up to hospitals in the rain with no umbrella. She held the hands of dying AIDS patients when everyone else was afraid. She hugged crying children and sat cross-legged on the floors of orphanages. The people saw something they hadn't seen before. A royal with empathy, and they loved her for it. But love from the people made her even more isolated at home. Charles grew colder. The Queen kept her distance. The palace staff began to whisper that Diana was too emotional, too much trouble. Some even called her dramatic, but she wasn't being dramatic. She was drowning. She began self-harming, scratching her legs, scraping her arms, digging her nails into her skin just to feel something that wasn't numbness. She would cry alone in palace bedrooms, then wipe her tears and go pose for family portraits. No one helped her. They all knew, and no one helped her. The royal doctors suggested rest, calm diet. No one asked her what she needed. What she really needed was for someone to sit with her and say, "I believe you." That moment never came. She was pregnant soon after. For a while there was hope. A child, a boy, they whispered excitedly. The future came. And Diana lit up for the first time in a long time. She was determined to be a good mother, a different kind of mother, one who held her child close, who didn't leave, who didn't send them away to be raised by nannies and tutors. She would not be her mother, and she would not let the palace raise her son. But the pregnancy wasn't easy. The morning sickness was unbearable. Her emotions grew wilder. Charles, instead of being supportive, became crueler. He mocked her tears. He ignored her panic. And once, after a particularly painful fight, Diana threw herself down the stairs at Sandringham. She survived. So did the baby. But it was a scream into a void that no one would answer. They called it attention-seeking. She called it desperation. But when William was born, she finally smiled a real smile. Holding him in her arms, she whispered, "You're mine, and I will protect you." That was the beginning of Diana's shift from princess to mother, from royal wife to something bigger. Not even the crown could stop her now. William was born on June 21st, 1982, and in that small hospital room, far from the echoing marble of the palace, Diana held something that finally felt real. A baby. Her baby. Not a title, not a duty, not a royal symbol, just a boy hers. She fell in love instantly, and she made a promise. A silent one, whispered into the soft hair of her newborn son. "I'll never leave you. I'll protect you from all of this." She would later break every royal rule about motherhood. She took William on royal tours. She hugged him in public. She bent down to his level when she spoke to him, instead of towering over him like protocol said she should. She took him to amusement parks, burger places, to school herself. No royal nanny, no chauffeur, just Diana in sunglasses and a mother's determination. The palace rolled their eyes. She was told she was spoiling him, that she was too attached. She was soft. She didn't care, because for once, she had purpose. But Charles didn't change. Fatherhood didn't transform him. He was proud, yes, smiling for cameras, sure. But he remained distant, formal, cold. Even when Harry was born 2 years later, Diana said. Charles reacted with disappointment. He wanted a girl. And even worse, he told people he was upset that Harry had red hair, a joke he claimed. But Diana didn't laugh. She started to see him not just as a distant husband, but as something else. A man who wasn't capable of softness. A man shaped by a system too old to change. Raised in cold nurseries, schooled by nannies, taught not to feel. And in that space, Diana decided quietly that she would not live like this anymore. She stopped trying to please him and started trying to survive him. She began to lean into the one thing that gave her energy. The people. She smiled for them. She touched their hands. She visited the places no one else from the royal family would go. Dots wards, minesweeper fields, burn units. She held the hands of the dying. She kissed children with no cameras around. It wasn't performance. It was instinct. And it terrified the palace. Because the more the public loved her, the less control they had. Diana was becoming powerful. Not politically, emotionally. She could walk into a room and silence it. The queen, for all her decades on the throne, had never done that. And Charles hated it. He resented her popularity. He once told friends, "Every time I step into a room, all they want to see is her." What was supposed to be a royal partnership had become a competition he couldn't win. So he distanced himself further. More trips without her, more speeches with icy undertones, or Camilla. Diana once again tried to speak to him. To reason, to ask. He said flatly, "You knew what you were getting into." She hadn't. By 1986, their marriage was no longer real. They still lived under the same roof, but everything in between had collapsed. Diana had her rooms, Charles had his. Public events were endeared with fake smiles and separate cars. She began to spiral again. The bulimia returned, stronger. Some days, she couldn't eat at all. Some days, she binged and purged so violently that she had to cancel appearances. She stopped sleeping. She started keeping secrets of her own. There were friends, close ones, confidants, even rumors of affairs. One in particular, James Hewitt, cavalry officer, blonde, affectionate, not royal. He saw her. He listened. It was wrong. She knew that. But for a brief moment, she felt human again. Of course, the palace found out. Of course, Charles had already done worse. But somehow, Diana's betrayal felt bigger in their eyes, because she was the wife, the princess. She was supposed to be silent, obedient, perfect. But she wasn't. She was emotional. She was erratic. She was speaking to reporters off the record, telling half-truths that lit fires in the press. She was starting to fight back. Quietly, elegantly, but with purpose. She stopped following the rules about what a royal woman should wear. Out went the stiff collars and careful pearls. In came red lipstick, sleek dresses, eyeliner, and power suits. She stopped apologizing for being visible. Charles, in response, started a quiet war. His aides began leaking things to the press stories of Diana being unstable, jealous, mentally unwell, that she was losing her grip, that she was a danger to the crown. And the public started to whisper, was she all right? Was she mad? But she wasn't mad. She was exhausted. And still, she kept going. She kept appearing at charity events. She kept holding hands with strangers. She kept raising her boys with the warmth no one had given her. She started to understand something dark, but powerful. The crown didn't love her, but the people did, and that was enough to keep going. It was 1992 when everything began to fall apart. Publicly, I know. The tension wasn't hidden anymore. Charles and Diana appeared at events together, but their distance was visible. No eye contact, no affection. She would smile for the crowd, wave at the cameras, and the moment they turned away, her face would drop. He'd speak politely, but only as required. Behind the palace walls, they were ghosts in the same home. But Diana had a weapon now, Truth, and she was done being quiet. She began to speak. At first, softly, indirectly, she gave interviews with gentle clues. She looked sad when asked about Charles. She dodged questions about their marriage with long silences. But the British tabloids, always hungry, began to dig deeper. They uncovered phone calls, whispers, quotes from close friends. And then one day in the middle of the royal news cycle, a bomb dropped. A book, written by Andrew Morton, titled Diana, Her True Story. It was published in 1992, and it shattered everything the palace had tried to protect. The world was stunned. Page after page, readers found confessions of bulimia, suicide attempts, emotional neglect, and betrayal. It painted a horrifying picture of palace life not royal, but robotic, magical, but cold. And people began to ask, was this really how the monarchy worked? The palace denied it, of course. They claimed Diana hadn't cooperated, that the stories were exaggerated. But behind closed doors, they knew the truth. She had helped. She had given tapes recordings of her own voice to a friend, who passed them on to Morton. Diana, without ever putting pen to paper, had written her own war cry. It was subtle, smart, and deeply dangerous. Because now, she was a threat. The Queen was furious. Charles was humiliated. The palace felt betrayed. But Diana had had enough. She wasn't going to pretend anymore. Neither was Charles. Not long after, a different tape surfaced, a recording of Charles speaking to Camilla intimately. Too intimately. The Tampingate scandal. Yes, it was real. Embarrassing, awkward, and vulgar. The press went wild. The monarchy, for the first time in decades, looked ridiculous. Suddenly, the perfect couple had shattered completely in public view, and the world picked sides. Diana's vulnerability, her openness, her tears, they made people feel close to her. Charles, meanwhile, looked stiff, distant, mechanical. People began to see him not as a prince, but as a man who broke a woman. He would never recover from that perception. By the end of that year, the separation was official. December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced it on the floor of Parliament. The Prince and Princess of Wales were no longer living together as man and wife. No one was surprised, but the questions still lingered. What now? Diana was still in the palace, still wearing the title, still attending royal events. But she wasn't really part of the family anymore. She was something else, something in between. She had her sons, and the public. And her smile, which now looked less hopeful, more haunted. She began spending more time alone, walking in Kensington Gardens, writing letters to charities, watching her boys grow up. William was becoming thoughtful, quiet, a lot like her. Harry was wild, mischievous. He made her laugh when she didn't want to. They were her everything. She was terrified the royal machine would swallow them whole. She started pushing back harder, questioning things, wanting more control over their schooling, their care, their time, and that, too, became a fight. Charles's team didn't want her involved. They wanted structure. Diana brought emotion, warmth, chaos. She fought for them anyway. And in private, she began to think. What if she walked away entirely? What if she gave up the crown, the tiara, the whole act? Could she do it? Could she survive without the protection of the monarchy? Or would they destroy her? The press was growing nastier. They camped outside her gym, her home, her car. Sometimes they followed her on motorbikes. Sometimes they shouted cruel questions just to see her flinch. She started wearing sunglasses everywhere, not because of the sun, because the cameras never stopped. They followed her down the street, up escalators, into bathrooms, into restaurants. They chased her like she was prey, and slowly she stopped trusting anyone. She still had friends. A few. But the walls were closing in. Her phones were tapped. Her guards were watching. Every person she spoke to ended up quoted in the papers. She said once, "There's no better way to dismantle a personality than to isolate it." And she was right. But Diana wasn't just breaking. She was preparing for something bigger. For a final move that would shake the monarchy to its bones. And it was coming, soon. She had been quiet for too long. Let them twist her story. Let them feed the press while calling her unstable. Let them call her dramatic, emotional, unpredictable. But Diana had always known one thing. When she spoke, the world listened. And now she was ready. It was November 1995. Diana sat down in a dimly lit room in front of BBC journalist Martin Bashir. Her voice was calm, tired, but clear. The room was small. No palace staff, no advisors, just her and a camera. She looked like a ghost of a fairy tale. Pale, dignified, hurt. And then she said the words that would haunt the crown forever. "There were 3 of us in this marriage," she said softly. "So it was a bit crowded." The interview aired on Panorama. It didn't just make headlines. It burned through the country like fire. People sat up in their living rooms, stunned. The princess, their princess, was telling the truth. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't sugarcoating. She wasn't reading from a royal-approved script. She was just Diana, raw, shattered, brave. She spoke of her bulimia, of how the palace ignored it, how the press nearly drove her to madness, how she felt like a prisoner, how no one cared, not even the man she married. She said she wasn't fit to be queen, and that she didn't want to be. She wanted to be the queen of people's hearts, and in that moment, she was. The monarchy was shaken. The queen was reportedly horrified, furious that such a public confession had gone live without palace approval, furious that Diana had spoken not as a royal, but as a woman. Charles, too, was humiliated. Every attempt to appear dignified, controlled, mature shattered in 20 minutes of television. People looked at him differently after that. Cold, dishonest, distant. But Diana didn't flinch. She had said what she came to say. The aftermath was brutal. The Queen sent her a formal letter urging her and Charles to divorce, not separate. Not wait. Divorce. It was time. In 1996, the divorce was finalized. Anna was no longer Her Royal Highness. She lost the title. She kept the style Princess of Wales, but not the security, not the power. She was stripped of her place, of her platform, but not of her spirit. She walked out of that palace with nothing but her 2 sons and her voice. And she decided, then and there, that she would use it. She focused on her charity work. Landmines, homelessness, AIDS, leprosy. Things no royal had ever touched. She hugged people who were considered untouchable. She crossed lines that the monarchy had drawn in stone. And yet, even in her freedom, the cameras never left. They followed her to hospitals, to gala dinners, to the gym, to her car. They leaned out of bushes, laid on sidewalks, shouted her name in crowded streets. And Diana, now alone, became both powerful and vulnerable. She began dating again, quietly at first. Men who cared, some who didn't. She was looking for something she'd never had: peace, kindness, a simple, honest love. She thought maybe she found it. His name was Dodi Fade. He was Egyptian, film producer, and a billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. He was charming, flashy, gentle in public. And for a moment, Diana allowed herself to believe this could be something. That maybe, for once, she was not being used, not being watched like a zoo animal. They traveled, they laughed, they kissed in the sun. The paparazzi followed every step. And Diana, for the first time in years, looked genuinely happy. But the press grew more aggressive. They circled her like vultures. She couldn't go anywhere without being chased. She was photographed in swimsuits, eating dinner, holding hands, crying. She tried to ignore it, to keep moving, to pretend it didn't hurt, but it did. And then came Paris. It was August 30th, 1997. Paris shimmered with late summer heat. Lights danced off the Seine. The Ritz Hotel stood quiet and elegant in the heart of the city. Inside, Diana sat in a suite with Dodie, tucked away from the flashing lenses that never seemed to blink. They had dinner, talked, smiled in a way that felt almost normal. Outside, the paparazzi were waiting. They had followed her all week, on the boat, in the car, on balconies. Diana, used to the chase, had grown tired. But that night, something felt heavier, more frantic. The photographers had multiplied. They surrounded every exit, peered through windows, clicked relentlessly. Dodie suggested they leave quietly. The plan: send out a decoy car from the front and sneak out the back. Henry Paul, the Ritz's deputy head of security, would drive them. It was after midnight. Diana didn't look afraid. She looked tired, just tired. She held Dodie's hand as they walked down to the back exit. Henry Paul was waiting. The engine purred softly in the silence. Their bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, climbed into the front passenger seat. Diana and Dodie sat in the back. They didn't wear seatbelts. They never reached their destination. The Mercedes pulled away from the Ritz, circled around, and headed toward the Ponte Lalma tunnel. The paparazzi gave chase. Motorcycles, scooters, a swarm of machines roaring through the Paris streets like wild dogs chasing prey. Flashbulbs lit the night sky. Shouts echoed between the buildings. And then, in the tunnel, at high speed, the car veered. Henry Paul lost control. The Mercedes slammed into the 13th pillar. Steel crumpled like paper. Tires squealed. Glass exploded into the dark. A screech, a silence, and then nothing but flashing lights and smoke. Inside the car, it was devastation. Dodie was killed instantly. Henry Paul, too. The bodyguard was badly injured, but conscious. And Diana, she was still alive, barely. Pinned in the wreckage, her body broken, her pulse fading, her eyes fluttering. Photographers reached the scene within seconds. Instead of helping, they took pictures of her bleeding, dying. Some leaned over the wreck. Some tried to get closer angles. One even aimed a camera directly into the car while she gasped for air. Trevor Rees-Jones was screaming, telling them to stop. But they didn't stop. They never stopped. An ambulance arrived, slowly. French emergency protocol delayed on the scene movement. They stabilized her as best they could in the tunnel. A weak pulse, a shallow breath, internal bleeding. They cut her from the car carefully. It was 2:06 a.m. when they arrived at the hospital. Diana's heart had stopped once in the ambulance. They revived her. She was taken straight to surgery, but the damage was too deep. A tear in a major vein near the heart. Too much blood lost. Too much trauma. At 4 a.m., they pronounced her dead. Princess Diana, dead at 36. The doctors tried to prepare the announcement. But how do you prepare the world for that? She had been so alive just hours ago. Laughing, breathing, kissing someone she finally cared for. And now gone. Not from illness. Not from old age. But from a crash. From a chase. From the flashing lights of people who never let her live in peace. At the Ritz, phones rang. At Kensington Palace, aides were awakened. William and Harry only, 15 and 12, were asleep at Balmoral with their father. No one had the words. The news broke slowly. Radio stations went silent, then somber. Broadcasters removed their makeup and ties. A BBC anchor appeared on screen in black, his voice trembling. We have reports that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car crash in Paris. And just like that, the world stopped. People stood still. In homes, on sidewalks, in kitchens, taxis. They shook their heads. They said, "No, it can't be." They repeated her name like a prayer. People wept. Strangers gathered outside Buckingham Palace within hours. Pajamas, barefoot, holding candles, carrying flowers, whispering, crying, kneeling on wet pavement, writing notes and taping them to the gates. She was the only one we cared about. She was like us. She didn't deserve this. Inside the palace, silence. No flag at half-mast. No statement. The Queen remained in Balmoral. Some said she was protecting the boys. Others said she didn't know how to respond. After all, Diana was no longer royal. But the people didn't care about titles. She was still their princess. And she had died running from a world that never left her alone. The world didn't sleep that night. From Paris to Karachi, London to New York, millions stared at television screens, eyes red, mouths open, hands clasped over hearts. Princess Diana, gone, felt impossible, like a mistake. Like someone would come on air and say, "She's fine. It was all a rumor." But that moment never came. Instead, they showed the wreckage. The crushed car, the tunnel, the bouquet on the pavement, candles lit by trembling hands, glowing beneath her smiling photographs. And in London, outside Kensington Palace, the flowers began to arrive. 1, then 10, then 100. By noon, the gates were drowned in color. Thousands of bouquets, thousands of cards, children's drawings, tear-soaked letters. People stood in silence, arms wrapped around strangers. Some knelt. Some sang softly. Others simply stood and stared, not blinking, as if her ghost might appear at the windows. Inside Balmoral, Diana's boys woke up. William was 15, Harry 12. Charles sat them down. No one knows exactly what he said. The moment was private. It's too raw for any camera. But when they emerged hours later, pale and stiff, the world saw it in their eyes. A grief far too old for their young faces. William said later, "I remember feeling completely numb, and Harry, he couldn't cry. Not yet. Not then." Diana's body was flown back to England. Alone in a grey coffin, draped in a royal standard. Soldiers saluted. Crowds stood frozen. Porters whispered instead of shouting. Even the most ruthless tabloids lowered their gaze. And still, the palace said little. No flag was flown at Buckingham Palace. No official statement of mourning. The Queen stayed in Scotland. The silence grew louder. The people grew angrier. This was Diana, the one who held the sick, who knelt in landmine fields, who wrapped her arms around AIDS patients when no one else dared to. She wasn't a politician. She was a mother, a woman, a heart on legs. This wasn't a woman who could be forgotten politely, and now she was gone. On September 6, 1997, the funeral was held. It wasn't state. It wasn't royal. It might as well have been. Over 2 billion people watched. The streets of London were silent as the funeral procession began. Horses clopped softly. Guards walked in perfect rhythm. Diana's coffin, simple in oak, was carried on a gun carriage, and behind it walked 5 people. 8. Prince Philip, Prince Charles, Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, and then 2 boys. One in a black suit too big for his frame. The other barely tall enough to see above the casket. William, Harry, side by side, eyes down, shoulders square, walking behind the coffin of their mother. They didn't flinch. They didn't cry. They didn't look left or right. They walked as they were told to walk, the weight of the world pressing on their backs. Years later, Harry said no child should be asked to do that. He was right. Inside Westminster Abbey, 2,000 people gathered. Celebrities, politicians, royals. But no one shined brighter than the stories. Told about Diana, she wasn't remembered for her crown. She was remembered for her touch, her kindness, her courage. Elton John, her friend, stepped to the piano, and he sang, "Goodbye, England's Rose." The notes filled the cathedral, soft as rain, heavy as stone. People wept openly. Even the queen dabbed her eyes. For a moment, even royalty looked human. Diana's brother delivered a eulogy, fierce, raw, defiant. She was the most hunted person of the modern age, he said. He promised the crowd and the world that her sons would be protected, that they would grow up knowing who their mother truly was. Not a scandal, not a broken marriage, but a woman who gave everything and was broken for it. And then the bells tolled. The coffin was carried out once more. The flowers thrown by strangers landed gently on top. One card fluttered loose. On it, a single word written in a child's hand, Mummy. After the funeral, the world went quiet, not silent, just still, as if the entire planet had exhaled, but didn't quite know how to breathe in again. Streets were cleared. Black suits hung back in closets. People returned to work, to life, to noise. But something had shifted permanently. The girl who had once smiled shyly from under her fringe on the steps of a palace was now a ghost in every heart. The monarchy tried to return to normal, but there was no normal anymore. For days after the funeral, Buckingham Palace was still cloaked in flowers. They had begun wilting, dripping softly onto the sidewalks, and yet no one dared remove them. It was as if they weren't flowers, but messages, not petals, but prayers. Inside the palace, the queen had seen something no monarch likes to admit. The people didn't even listen to the crown anymore. They listened to Diana, and now that Diana was gone, people were angry. Not at her death, but at the silence that followed it. Why didn't the royal family speak sooner? Why was there no flag lowered? Why was the crown so cold? It was the first time in modern history that the royal family had to defend their silence. The queen finally gave a televised speech, not in the grand hall of a castle, but from the comfort of a small room in a simple black dress. She called Diana an exceptional and gifted human being, but too many had felt too late. Diana had already spoken louder than any monarch ever could, and the boys were left to carry the weight of her memory. At just 15, William was suddenly the most watched young royal in the world. His mother was gone. His father was distant. His every move would be compared to hers. He once said that after her death, he would walk through crowds and feel every eye on him. Harry, younger, angrier, didn't process the loss for years. He later admitted that he locked it all away. The pain, the tears, the truth. He smiled when told to smile, shook hands when told to, but inside he was boiling. His mother, the one who held his hand when he was afraid of thunder, was now a face on the news. People still whispered her name wherever they went. Some said Diana was killed, that it wasn't an accident, that it was orchestrated. Theories bloomed like weeds, dark, tangled, ugly. Whispers about phone tapping, missing CCTV footage, MI6 planted stories. Diana herself had once said in a letter, "They are planning something." A car crash. Some called it paranoia. Others believed it fully. But no truth was ever confirmed. No real answers came. It's just speculation. And silence, the smell of flowers that still lingered at Kensington Palace for weeks. Her apartment there was preserved for a time. Her room remained untouched. Dresses still hung in the closet. Letters were left unopened. Photographs remained on the dresser. But Diana herself was gone. And yet not really. Because everywhere people looked, they saw her, in William's eyes, in Harry's temper. In every mother who bent down to kiss her child's scraped knee, or held their face like they were the only thing in the world, people saw Diana, and the world began to change because of her. Before Diana, royals didn't hug. After Diana, they did. Before her, there was distance. After her, there was empathy. She struggled deeply. She had cracked something ancient, broken the glass between the royals and the people, made kindness royal, made pain visible. In doing so, she left a legacy that no amount of royal protocol could erase. She wasn't perfect. She never claimed to be. She made mistakes. She broke rules. She loved the wrong people. But she was real, and that's what made her immortal. Time passed, years folded into years. But Diana never faded. Even after the flowers were cleared, the newspapers changed headlines, and the palace resumed its rituals. Her presence lingered, like perfume in a quiet room. Not loud, just ... there, in the faces of her sons. William grew into a man who shook hands like she did, warmly with both palms. He looked people in the eye. He asked strangers how they felt, not just out of duty, but because he meant it. He married a girl who reminded the world a little bit of Diana. Graceful, kind, close to the people. When William and Kate had children, they named their daughter Charlotte Elizabeth Diana. Her name, right there, stitched into the royal bloodline, carried her fire. He smiled like her, wide, mischievous, sudden. He loved like her, fiercely without apology. He too married outside tradition. And when he walked away from royal duties to protect his wife and child, people whispered, Diana would have done the same. And maybe she would have. Her voice echoes through them. In every cause they fight for. In every hug they give that breaks protocol. Every tear they shed without shame. Diana taught them not just how to be princes, but how to be human. Outside the palace, her legacy grew louder. The lawn mine charities were flooded with support. HIV stigma cracked further under the weight of her past visits. People spoke more openly about eating disorders, about mental health, about not pretending, all because she had dared to tell the truth, even when it wasn't royal, and the world thanked her for it. There are statues now, murals, songs, candlelight vigils. Even 20-25 years later, people still leave flowers outside Kensington Palace on her birthday. Children born after her death know her name. It's not because she was a princess, but because she was something deeper. She was felt. Not everyone gets that. To be felt years after you're gone. To be remembered not for your position, but for your soul. For the way you made people believe kindness was stronger than crowns. Diana Spencer, the shy girl who became a woman the world never stopped watching, but not because of her tiara, because of her heart. And when people say her name now, they don't whisper it in sadness. They say it like a blessing, like a candle still burning in a very cold place. Princess Diana, gone too soon, but never gone at all.